Monday, the 26th of September, 2022, and we have a very special program today, in as much as we have a serious expert, not just on parental alienation, but on one of its more insidious and damaging aspects, that of false allegations, particularly as these pertain to types of child abuse. Alan Blotcky is a doctor of he's a clinical and forensic psychologist. He deals in parental alienation. He's an expert witness for court. He's a custody evaluator. He's also a parent evaluator. And he has published 17 papers on this subject, many of which, of course, were peer-reviewed as well. So in the first instance, may I welcome Alan Blotcky to the webinar this afternoon. Hi, Alan.
Hey there. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you on board. Let's start at the beginning, if we may, Alan. There's still some discussion as to what parental alienation is. May I ask you for what you would consider to be a working definition?
So parental alienation is when one parent intentionally and purposefully tries to sabotage the child's relationship with the other parent. That's the bottom line definition to it. The attempt is to have the child convinced that the other parent is unworthy and could be even dangerous, to the point that the child wants to reject the other parent. So in essence, the alienating parent is using the child as a weapon to reject the other parent, to get the other parent out of that child's life. That's the bottom line definition to it.
There would be many who would say, look, there's no blood here. Women and men have been trying to disenfranchise their children from the other party when they separate for millennia. What's new?
Well, I mean, there is some truth to that. This is not a new phenomenon. It's probably a newly named phenomenon. It has been going on. And let me just say right off the top, there are very, very many shades of gray. There are many different degrees of severity. And you can have mild alienating behavior, you can have severe alienating behavior, and everything in between. I think there's a difference between, let's say, in a normal divorce, where one parent may make some disparaging comments occasionally to a child about their ex-spouse. If that's all that's involved, it's pretty harmless. What I'm talking about is an intentional, purposeful, planned out mission to get this child to reject the other parent.
The purpose of which is what, Alan?
To have the child reject the other parent.
Yeah,
Literally reject the other parent.
Well, why? It doesn't make their work harder. They've got twice as much work to do then. Why wouldn't they want to keep the other party on side and use them as a resource, at least, to help them look after the kids?
So I'm writing a paper right now about what are some of the reasons why people engage in parental alienation. One can be vindictiveness, out of anger, just pure vindictiveness and anger. Another reason might be fear. I'm afraid of losing my child to my ex-spouse. I want to make sure that my child loves me. I want to make sure that my child lives with me. And so, if I get rid of the other parent, my fear can be taken care of. Jealousy can be a major compelling reason. Reenactment of a parent's own family of origin. If you were involved in alienation as a child, you're going to be more likely to be an alienator when you become a parent.
So on that multi-generational aspect, Alan, it's pretty well known that a lot of people who are convicted of being child abusers, it transpires were abused themselves as children. So that's a kind of an
Yes,
ongoing phenomenon that appears to pay into this concept of multi-generationalism.
right.
As a parent who was being parentally alienated, what should they do in terms of, they know their spouse, husband, ex-husband or ex-wife is parentally alienating them, but they don't want their kids to be doing it to their grandkids as well. So how do they deal with the situation as the victims, if you like, of the parental alienation? The real victims, of course, being the kids, but as the
Right, right.
parental, the
Well,
adult victim.
right. The alienated parent is a victim. And so there's several things that I say. One is you cannot be passive. You have to hit it firmly and strongly and assertively. You have to have the right attorney, because in many of these cases, the only way to deal with true parental alienation is legally. Most of these parents have tried to communicate with their ex and try to make headway that way. Usually that goes nowhere. So oftentimes, most times, legal action is what's needed. You have to have the right attorney. You have to have an assertive, proactive attorney who is there on your behalf. You
Okay,
have to have
yeah,
you
yeah,
have to have you have to have a mental health expert on
yeah.
your team who can be an advocate, who can explain this to all the parties and the judge. You have to really be assertive and proactive are the two terms that I usually say. The problem is rejected parents, they get depressed, they get scared, they get angry, they
And
get
poor.
agitated, and sometimes that can keep them paralyzed. I suggest, what I recommend is that you fight through that and get proactively determined to make a difference in this situation.
What about the financial aspect, though, Al? Because an awful lot
Yeah,
of parentally alienated parents, that they give it their best shot. They fight and they fight and they fight until they've lost absolutely everything, and then they say, "Well, what's the common denominator in the problem here? I'm the one that just keeps fighting. Maybe if I stop fighting, be better for my kids. Anyway, I've no money to employ lawyers. I've no money to get experts. I can't do anything else. I've given it
right,
my best shot. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight to not become depressed, as you've just suggested. Of course,
right.
you're no use to anybody if you're not around, right? So, and in full control of your abilities. But, when you don't have any money, when all you have is maybe a supervised visit with your kids twice a month or something like that, how do you undo the damage that is being done to those kids so that it does not become multi-generational and something from which your grandkids will suffer?
Yeah, I mean, I hear those stories virtually every week. Somebody will contact me, they want help, but they've exhausted their money. They've been through 5 attorneys. Nobody seemed to help. They don't have any money to hire an attorney or a mental health expert. And it's a sad situation because to deal with the legal system takes money. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. You do the best you can. That's what I tell people, is you do the best you can. You have as much contact with your child as you possibly can. You be the good parent, you be the smart parent, you be the emotionally healthy parent. And what I always tell people, and it's true in my experience, these kids will come back to you at some point. Now, I don't say that to recommend that you passively sit by, but not all is lost. Many of these kids, most of these kids will make contact with you at some point down the line.
What
But
kind of age does that transition occur?
yeah, I don't know. It varies. I've seen 14 and 15-year-olds do it. I've seen 18 and 19-year-olds do it. I see young adults in their 20s do it. But it almost always happens that they will make contact. But my heart goes out to people who have exhausted all their money. They've been through 5 attorneys. They have no confidence in attorneys. And the legal system is just not set up to deal with that particular predicament.
And we're going to come to that in just a moment. One of the helping groups that we have here in Ireland are kind of healthcare professionals, social welfare people that we're called TUSLA here. They work very, very hard to try and help people in these situations, but their hands are largely tied by the fact that, as I said earlier, there's no blood. Where's the evidence of any damage? What can you help us understand about the damage that parental alienation does? Does it actually seriously damage people, or is it a minor band-aid fix?
Of course it damages people. Research clearly shows that children who reject a parent for no legitimate reason are more prone to have anxiety, they're more prone to have depression, they're more prone to lack trust in relationships, they're more prone to turn to drug abuse, they're more prone to repeat the alienation in their own relationships going forward. This is not a minor deal. It's clear that this kind of stuff damages kids. And that's why we say that severe parental alienation, which is defined as a child totally rejecting the other parent, the rejected parent, is child psychological abuse. It reaches the level of child psychological abuse, which is on par with physical abuse and sexual abuse.
Well, let me just stop you right there. How is it possibly on a par? I mean, how can a child being physically assaulted by somebody and scarred for the rest of their lives? I mean, most of us, unfortunately, have come across someone who has been sexually abused in their childhood. We had an unfortunate epidemic of it here 40 or 50 years ago within the Catholic Church. So we've all heard the stories, but, you know, I mean, they're horrendous what they do to people, and people, as you said earlier, the inability to trust in relationships. I mean, that makes marriages fail. It makes lives just, how can, you know, simple saying nasty things about a parent affect a kid in the same way?
But that's not what I was saying. It's not simply saying nasty things about a parent. Amy Baker was the first to publish. There's 17 different behaviors and strategies that parents engage in constitute parental alienation. You want me to read them off?
If you can we've had Amy on and she's gone through them with us, but if you can very briefly point out the ones that you think are most salient, that would be very helpful.
Okay, so there's 17 of them, everything ranging from bad mouthing, which is what you just mentioned, to limiting a parent's contact, to interfering with communication, to rarely mentioning the rejected parent's name, to withholding love and approval when the child likes the other parent, telling the child that the other parent doesn't love you, telling the child that the rejected parent is dangerous, asking the child to spy on the other parent, telling the child to keep secrets from the other parent, involving the child in the court decisions and court actions, referring to a step parent as mom or dad, and referring to the other parent as by their first name, withholding medical and school information from that other parent, even changing the child's last name. All of those things, and there are many more. For example, false allegations of abuse, I would put that as number 18 in terms of that basic. Okay, so it's not just one of those. It's all of those.
Yeah. So that's a really helpful list, Alan. You'd subscribe to what Dr. Baker says there, would you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, why don't we invite people, if they would like a copy of those 17 lists, because we've got them already. They could write into us, send us an email, or click on the website below. We're trying to get subscribers for our channel because we're almost there in terms of the 1,000 critical number that we need. So anybody who can subscribe to our channel and learn more about the great work that Dr. Blotcky and others are doing would be very much appreciated. But also you can email us at info@alienated.ie, and we can send them a list of Dr. Baker's 17, what did you call it, the 17 factors, is it?
Strategies.
So that would be a good checklist for people who are trying to
Right.
ascertain, is there parental alienation going on?
Right.
Do you see
So-
any of these things? And how many of them do you need to see out of the 17 to qualify it as being PA?
Yeah, I don't think we know that, but I will tell you from experience that you don't just see one, you don't see one or two. You're going to see 8 or 10 or 12 of them.
Okay.
Can I go further?
Please.
So I want to talk about what are the 8 characteristics of an alienated child, because this is just as important for our listeners to understand. So here are the 8 basic characteristics of an alienated child. First is the child does not want to have contact with the other parent for what we call weak or frivolous or absurd reasons. For example, I'm bored. Well, that's not a legitimate reason. I had a case where the daughter said she didn't want to go visit the dad because she thought there was mold in his house. That's not a legitimate reason. So the reason for contact refusal is what we call weak or frivolous or absurd even. So that's number one. Number two, there's what we call a campaign of denigration. In other words, the child becomes obsessed with hating that other parent. In other words, it's total, it's extreme, it's bizarre that they become totally obsessed with hating that other parent. As a part of that, there is what we call a lack of ambivalence. In other words, the alienating parent, who is the favorite parent, is up on a pedestal, and the rejected parent is demonized. And so you find that lack of ambivalence in an alienated child. The alienating parent is the wonderful parent. The rejected parent, I hate them and they're the devil. That's essentially the way it gets in severe alienation. Then we have what we call independent thinker phenomenon, which is where a child will say to you, I don't want to see my other parent, and I came to that decision all by myself. Nobody told me what to think or say. Well, that's just not patently untrue. When you have a child who lives with an alienating parent, they're getting all kinds of messages about the negative aspects of the other parent. So when a child says, nobody's telling me what to do, I've come to this conclusion all by myself, it doesn't ring true. It's not true. And here's why. All children want to love both of their parents, naturally, freely, equally. Children want to love both of their parents. So that when a child stops loving one of the parents, something's going on. Here's some other characteristics. They reflexively support the favored parent. No matter what the topic is, no matter what the issue is, the alienating parent is right. The rejected parent is wrong. Reflexively, that's the way they respond. And then finally, alienated kids will not only reject the other parent, but the other parent's entire extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them get put into the same pot of demonized, and I don't want to have contact with them. So I mention these 8 characteristics because it's not just the 17 alienating behaviors that are important to identify. We also have to identify, when do we have a truly alienated child? And so those are the characteristics we look for.
Now, one of the areas in which you specialize, and thank you very much for that clarification. As I say, we will make those 17 factors available for people as a checklist to when they're trying to ascertain whether or not PA is going on. One of the weapons of choice for someone who determines to parentally alienate their child is to, as you say, demonize the other party. And in extreme cases, it happens that they make false allegations, sometimes of the most horrendous nature, about the other party, and even go as far as to convince the child that things of an inappropriate nature happened, such that the child will then tell other people that it happened. And of course, when the other people hear it from the child, they presume, well, it must be true.
So
How?
let me say several different things to that. First of all, keep in mind, little kids especially, but all children, even teenagers, are what we call highly suggestible, meaning children and teenagers can be swayed, they can be cajoled, they can be coached, they can be bribed, they can be manipulated by a parent. Especially little kids, as you say, can be told stuff so much that they don't know whether it happened or not. And so if mama says it happened, or if daddy says it happened, it must have happened. And so that gets communicated that way. The second biggest mistake that happens in these cases is that everybody involved in a case, whether it be the judge or an attorney or a mediator or even a mental health professional, you cannot take what a child says at face value, unquestioned and unexamined. Because what we know is that children who have been alienated aren't thinking right in their heads. And so you cannot take what they say at face value without examining it and trying to test out whether what they're saying really fits the evidence. So those are the two things I want to say right off the bat about kids in these cases. You cannot listen to what they say and just take it simply at face value. And you've got to understand how suggestible kids are, even teenagers, even teenagers.
So when you have a situation where, we've heard cases of people who are professionally in charge of running a creche, and they are legally qualified by the police to look after, maybe 40 or 50 kids all day, every day in their daily life, who are not allowed to see their own children because a false allegation was made to a child by a mother or father, who was then taken to an unfamiliar doctor, let's say, and they're asked to recount what they think had happened. And of course, the suggestibility has already been identified eloquently by your good self. And that is then presented to the doctor, who calls in the social workers to say, hang on, that we've got a kid here reporting that. The
Right.
kid tells their friends tell their parents. Now, this victimized parent has actually done nothing, but that person, she or he, turns up to the school to say hello to his kid or her kid, and the next thing, nobody wants to talk to them, and their work life goes to pot. It can absolutely devastate some people's lives.
It absolutely can. And I would give them the same advice that I mentioned before. You have to hit this head on. You have to be proactive and assertive and determined to prove that this is a false allegation of abuse. The two ways to do that: first, documentation. If you have emails, text messages, recordings, pictures, transcripts, anything you have that will help document the true story about what's going on. The second important tool is what I call the timeline. Put together a timeline of all the events and filings and court actions and verbal statements, anything that will help show why this false allegation of abuse is coming out. So here's what I'll say about that. Most false allegations of abuse come out in response to something that's going on in the legal case. Either the parent has filed for divorce, which might trigger a false allegation of abuse, or has filed for custody of the child, which might trigger a false allegation of abuse, or has gotten a new romantic partner, which might trigger a false allegation of abuse, or maybe has remarried. That will trigger a false allegation of abuse. Oftentimes, if you plot it out on a timeline, you will see certain events triggering these false allegations of abuse. The other thing I will say is this. When the very first allegation of abuse occurs during a divorce proceeding, that is a huge red flag that it may be false, because the timing of it is just too curious. All of a sudden, we're getting an allegation of abuse right at the time the divorce proceeding is started. Red flag. The other thing that I see oftentimes is not only will a parent lodge one false allegation of abuse, they might go on a rampage. There might be 2 or 3 or 5 different false allegations of abuse during the divorce proceeding. That to me is a huge red flag, that all of it is fabricated and that all of it is being used as a weapon in the court proceeding.
So on to the court proceedings. We know now that parental alienation it has the same effects on the kids as physical sexual assault.
Right.
We know it's multi-generational. It's a very serious issue. It absolutely will destroy or can destroy lives.
Right.
In the courtroom, I know you're a big fan of using timelines. Would you like to explain how you use those?
Yeah, I mean, I've used them. I've gotten attorneys to put them up on a big screen TV and go through it step by step. I've done that in criminal cases of false allegations of abuse, and I've done it in divorce or family cases. Put it up on a big screen TV or put it up on a big white poster board and have the timeline visual.
So what's on this timeline?
Any major events that help explain why this false allegation of abuse is coming out. I had a criminal case not too long ago where the timeline was this. The wife came to the husband and said, you know, I'm not very happy in this marriage. I'd like some time to kind of explore my options, meaning she wanted permission to go mess around. And he said, no, thank you. I want a divorce and I want custody of the 3 kids, because your idea of going to explore your options is just not a very parenting kind of thing to do. Within 48 hours, there was a false allegation of abuse against this man about their youngest child. She had taken that child to a doctor within 48 hours so that doctor could explore this young daughter's hymen. Well, this timeline, the story gets crazier. I'm not going to go through the story, but the beginning of it told the whole story. The charges were dropped. The timeline told the whole story. And so in a lot of cases, if not all cases, such a timeline can really pinpoint why things happen in response to other things. So I am a big believer in timelines.
There's also an issue. I mean, I like it too. It's a great way to kind of explain it. As you say, visually, you're appealing to a different sense in the
Right.
judge's mind as well,
Right.
Helping them understand something which is perhaps alien to them. If you don't have dedicated family law judges, and they're, you know, one day they're listening to a guy saying, "Oh, I didn't really mean
They weren't
to,
paying attention.
I didn't mean to
Right.
abuse my wife."
Right.
But really
I was
did. And the
texting on my phone.
Yeah. So in the context, though, of the courtroom, one of the things that we see at alienated.ie quite frequently is where the court process is actually used as a mechanism to enforce the parental alienation. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Happens all the time.
And we start off with, oh, I think my husband, he doesn't feed the kids properly when they're with him. Then, oh, he doesn't take them to school. Oh, he doesn't do his homework. Oh, I think my ex-wife drinks too much. I think she drinks around the kids. Right. And every time the case is making some progress, and of course it's typically 6 months between each hearing. The next time there's a hearing, so okay, well now you know your wife has proven that she doesn't drink alcohol to the right. satisfaction of this court. Oh yes, but did you know that she also used to sexually abuse my son? And then so that's another 6 months, and right. so there's this kind of
absolutely.
It's like a domino effect. Well, one will kick us down the line till the next one, and then the next one, and the bottom line is the court services are being used as a means of enforcing the parental alienation.
So I don't know if we want to go here, but I'm going to go here. My biggest soapbox is about attorneys. I think it is outrageous the way attorneys deal with parental alienation cases. Now, I've had conversations with attorneys here who basically will say, well, it's not our responsibility to figure that out. You're placing the blame or the responsibility on us is unreasonable. But when I certainly think what we call here the guardian ad litem, who is the child's attorney, I think it's the guardian ad litem's responsibility to figure out, do I have an alienated child? And if the answer to that is yes, who's the alienator and who's the rejected parent? I think the guardian ad litem has a responsibility to figure that out and to do something about that. But I also think the alienating parent's attorney has a responsibility to do something. And I think the rejected parent's attorney has the responsibility to do something. So that's my current big soapbox. And I'm in the process of writing a paper on the responsibilities of the guardian ad litem. Because here, I will say 99.9% of the time, they do nothing. They're passive. They won't even interview both parents. They interview the child twice. Whatever the child says goes. That's their impact, and it's outrageous.
Okay, so you said that the attorney is the guardian ad litem.
Yes.
So the attorney is responsible to interview the kids in the States, is it?
Yeah, and most of the time, our guardian ad litem is an attorney.
Here we would have a kind of a psychological professional. We have things called Section 47.
Much smarter.
Section 32 assessments where a professional psychologist will come in and assess the situation and give an expert opinion to the court.
Now, we have custody evaluations sometimes, but the actual guardian ad litem is an attorney. I don't know any of them who have had mental health training, none of them. So they don't even know, we're asking them to do something perhaps that they're not equipped to do, but who suffers the consequence for that? The child and the rejected parent.
We do have legislation, to the best, and I hasten to add, I'm not an attorney, but a lawyer, as we call them, or solicitor. But it is my understanding that we have legislation in this country, and therefore presumably the rest of the British influenced judiciary around the world have something similar, America being one of those, whereby an attorney is not allowed assist a client who is in any way not looking after the interests of a child. It's not that the solicitor is not allowed to help a father who they know is parentally alienating a child against their mother, for instance, by implication. Would you agree?
Well, we don't have such language here. What attorneys fall back onto here is that their role is to zealously represent their client. And I always say, but to zealously represent your client doesn't mean you're supposed to have blinders on to the truth. And that's where things break down. I don't think I've ever had an attorney come to me and say, well, I've had a couple of times. I'll take that back. I can think of a couple of times, but very few times when an attorney will say, I know my client is the alienating parent in this situation, and I'm going to do something about it. I've had that happen a couple of times, in contrast to the 100 of times where that doesn't happen at all.
It's not really in the lawyer's interests, though, to do something about it, is it? Because, I mean, whilst, the lawyer has a professional and an ethical responsibility to, as you say, vigorously defend their client, whether or not their client is right or wrong is not their job to decide. The solicitor, lawyer, attorney involved in the case is also being paid by the hour.
Right.
So, if the case resolves, the paychecks stop. So,
well, and my argument to that is all of that is true. All of that's true. But we're talking about kids. We're not talking about adults. We're talking about kids, little kids or older kids or teenagers, but they're still kids. I think we ought to have different expectations, different norms, different ideas about how a good resolution in those cases should look like. And if that means you withdraw from a case as an attorney, so be it. Or if that means the case gets resolved in a really good way, and that's taking away from your hourly paycheck, so be it. Sometimes we have to do the right thing.
But you're asking lawyers to sacrifice their own careers for the greater good, because they won't reach partner if they don't bring in more money, which they could do by, allowing a case where parental alienation is involved to continue for, 5 or 6 years rather than resolving it.
I think that's sad. I mean, I agree with you, but I think it's sad for the kids. I think it's sad for the kids.
Well, why? And that is why I presumed we in Ireland had this legislation saying they're not allowed to do anything which might be detrimental to the child.
Right.
Again,
right.
I'm not a lawyer, so this is all hearsay.
Yeah, but that's fantastic. If that's true, that's fantastic.
Well, I invite commentary on that from anyone in the audience who is qualified to let me know whether I'm right or wrong in that regard. And let's hope that to some degree I'm right. We have a huge number of questions coming in, which I'm happy to hold off till the end if there's anything specific by way of a presentation or that you'd like to make, or a flow of consciousness that you'd like to share with us.
I think the one area that we haven't touched on that I'd like to for a few minutes, and then we can go to the questions.
Sure.
I want to talk about treatment of parental alienation, because I want to say this up front. A parental alienation can be treated effectively and successfully. And that gets lost in the discussion sometimes, because we get so bogged down in trying to understand the intricacies of it, and we should. But we lose sight of the fact that parental alienation can be treated successfully. And here's the basic template. In order for treatment to be successful, the alienating parent has to be identified, and the alienating parent needs his or her own individual therapist with the singular goal of stopping the alienating behavior. At the same time, the alienated child and the rejected parent need what we call here reunification therapy. Now, the big mistake that happens here in the States is that judges will order reunification therapy like water. But what they're not doing is ordering the alienating parent to get individual therapy to stop the alienation. And so reunification therapy will often fail if the alienating parent hasn't stopped their behavior. So you have to have both components simultaneously. If you have both components simultaneously, and the judge is on board, and the attorneys are on board, and the mental health expert is on board, parental alienation can be treated effectively.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. One of the issues I know I have heard many times, and at alienated.ie, many of our parents also tell us is a problem is, there is no reunification therapy in Ireland. Nobody knows where to go to get it. And people are referred to a psychologist for reunification therapy or for therapy about why you shouldn't. And they go to these people, and the people don't know what parental alienation is. Do you think there is anywhere in the States to which people could be referred, which might be able to offer an online service like that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say look at the website for the Parental Alienation Study Group. There are lots of psychologists and psychiatrists in that group, and I would bet almost all of them know how to do reunification therapy. And wait a minute, that's an international group. That's just not in the States.
Yeah, that's his William Burnett's.
Yeah, he's the president of it right now.
So if you're a psychologist in Ireland or a mental health worker, one of the people working for TUSLA I mentioned earlier, how can you contribute to assisting in that process by way of doing some research, would you suggest?
I think they need to reach out and find some way to get some training, whether it's online training or personal, or seek it out, look for it, get on that website, seek out some of those people and see maybe they can do some virtual training, because I know everybody would be interested in doing that.
Yeah, we'll have a link up on our website as well to the parental alienation.
And I'm certainly available to do that as well.
So you could actually assist people virtually, like online with.
Yeah, I can certainly be a consultant and give them some major pointers and some things to read. Part of doing reunification therapy is having the knowledge base in your head about parental alienation. What are your goals of reunification therapy? What are the goals of reunification therapy? And then talk about how to do it. What are some of the roadblocks? What are some of the pitfalls? And I think people can get that kind of information from people who do it every day.
That sounds like a wonderful offer, and thank you. We will be happy to vet and pass on your contact details to people who contact us at info@alienate.ie in that regard. Just on to some of the questions that have come in then. One of the first ones was, is there a particular kind of prognosis that you can apply to a parent by way of, like, is there some kind of mental health disorder? Is it a personality disorder that a parent would want to employ parental alienation, which it would seem is, not good for the kid? So presumably a father or a mother must know that what they're doing is not good for their kid, and they must love their kid, so they got to have something a little bit loose.
Right. Yeah, I think if you look at the literature, most people would agree that parents who are what we call severe alienators, most of them probably have a personality disorder of one kind or another. But people always ask me about diagnosis, and here's my little spiel about that. I've gotten to the point where I don't really care about the parent's diagnosis because it doesn't really help. What helps is to focus in on their 17 behaviors, or perhaps more than 17 behaviors. I think you have to focus in on what they're doing to create the alienation. And knowing the diagnosis of that parent doesn't really help. Okay, everybody that does that has narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, so how does that help us? It doesn't. The only thing that helps us is to then be able to shine a light on all the different behaviors that this parent is doing to create this parental alienation for the child. So that's why I don't really talk about diagnosis very much, because I don't find it very useful especially in the intervention part, the treatment.
I suppose what people would like to be able to hang a hat on is if they say that, oh, this guy is parentally alienating his kid against their mother, therefore he's got, what did you call it, narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And we know that therefore he's likely to think along these lines. So in terms of dealing with a person, there's no point trying to reason emotionally or whatever.
Right. I mean, I think that's true in general. I certainly don't think it's true in every case.
Another one, how do you get an alienated parent to engage with therapy to get them to stop? They definitely won't pay for it. Reunification therapy is vilified in Ireland. So how can we get people to engage? And reunification therapy, of course, not covered by health insurance. How do I see reunification therapy? I do not see reunification therapy as evidence-based. And we've possibly heard, some of us, about the World Health Organization, the DCM 32 or whatever it was, that was considering whether or not parental alienation should be classified as a disease, and they decided it wasn't one.
Yeah, but so let's get into that for a minute, because Dr. Burnett, Dr. Harmon, and I have just finished a paper. It is flat out wrong to say that parental alienation is not covered or subsumed in DSM-5-TR. It is. There's 3 different diagnostic categories that can be used when you have a case of parental alienation. Those 3 categories don't spell out every possible conceivable condition that would fit that category. So no, the words parental alienation literally are not there, but they're intended to be used by parental alienation cases to fit one of those 3 categories. So a lot of the critics say parental alienation isn't real, it doesn't exist, we don't need to attend to it because it's not covered in DSM-5-TR. That's not true. It is covered. And Dr. Burnett, along with Dr. Baker, have recently submitted a proposal to DSM to include a new category called parental alienation relational problem. That would just make it more explicit. But I'm telling you, people that deal with parental alienation on a daily basis diagnose it as a part of DSM-5 in one of those 3 categories. So let's get that off the table right off, because people always throw that out. It's not a diagnosis, therefore it doesn't exist. It does exist, and it is a diagnosis. And what was the other part of your question? I forgot.
It wasn't my question. It was one that came in from a viewer. It was with regard to evidence-based.
So, well, reunification therapy is evidence-based. People do it here all the time. We know that it works, but it requires the alienating parent to stop their behavior simultaneously. Look, I'll tell you, the truth is the only way to get alienating parents to therapy is for the judge to order it.
I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that an Irish court cannot order somebody to get therapy. It has to be a voluntary thing.
Then there has to be enough influence exerted on that parent to do it, from the attorneys, from the mental health expert, whichever professionals are involved in the case need to get on the same page and exert enough influence on this parent.
Just on the diagnosis, the DSM-5-TR.
DSM-5-TR, yeah.
The words parental alienation have been the victim of what appears to be a campaign of slander to suggest that anyone who uses those words is actually an abuser trying to disguise what it is they're up to.
Right.
It's got traction though. The result of which is that some people have decided that it's best not to use the words parental alienation. And, you know, people who are ill-read on the subject may have heard, oh, parental alienation. Oh, yes, that's only pop psychology. It's not serious. To which end, and this is the point I wanted to come to, if I may, Doctor.
Yes.
Our legal, the the members of the judiciary, the High Court, the legal professionals, they held a big conference here. I think it was June in the Shelburne Hotel this year. And one of the things which, and I hasten to add, people like our organization were not invited. But one of the things that came out of that was that we should in the legal profession use a different term instead of parental alienation to describe parental alienation. And I think it was parental estrangement they came up with. And the reason for that is because the branding, if you like, parental alienation, if I understand their motives correctly, has this negative association, and they were doing their best to get rid of that. I suppose from alienated children first perspective, we would see that there is so much invested in the term parental alienation, and there's buy-in around the world, and it's kind of self-explanatory in the words used as to exactly what's going on. So we think that, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make sure people understand it is a wheel and not a square that's trying to roll.
So here, parental estrangement is not a viable alternative, because here in parental alienation—
I may be wrong about that exact word now, because obviously, as I say, I wasn't.
Okay. Well, parental alienation theory, the word estrangement means a child doesn't want to have contact with a parent for a legitimate reason.
I see.
I don't want to go see mom because she's always drunk, or I don't want to go see dad because his girlfriend is warranted now for theft. There's a legitimate reason why a child doesn't want to see the parent. That's what we call estrangement. Okay. Let me go through the 4 basic criticisms about parental alienation so that I can shoot them down real quickly. Is that okay?
Sure.
First, they keep saying that parental alienation theory is pseudoscience. Nothing could be further from the truth. There have been nearly 1,000 scientific research studies on parental alienation published in the top journals in the field. There have been 100 books written on parental alienation. To say that parental alienation is pseudoscience or doesn't have scientific underpinnings is just flat out disingenuous. It's false, it's wrong, it's disinformation. Second criticism, and I'm not going to go through it again, but it's about the DSM. It is covered, it is subsumed under DSM. To say that it's not is disingenuous and wrong. The third criticism, and this gets to what you mentioned a minute ago, they bring up the fact that parental alienation is misused, is misunderstood in the legal system. There's no doubt about that. There are times when an abusive person hides behind parental alienation as a way of justifying their abuse. It happens with men. It also happens with women. They fail to mention that. The same strategy is done by women. It's not gender specific. Both genders do that. So the fact that parental alienation is not well understood and sometimes misapplied doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater. It doesn't mean that parental alienation doesn't exist. It means that legal professionals need to get a better handle on what it means. And then the fourth criticism, and they say this all the time, oh, you parental alienation proponents, you find alienation every time a child doesn't want to see a parent. It's always alienation. That is simply not true. I see cases all the time where a child refuses to see a parent for very legitimate reasons. The word alienation never comes out of my mouth. So for them to say that that's all we see is simply not true. So their criticisms are false, they're disingenuous, they have an agenda.
Therein lies the rub, the agenda. What is that?
It seems like it's a gender-specific kind of narrative. Men are abusive, women are the victims, end of story. And I'm not saying that the vast majority women aren't victims, they are. I'm just saying the story is much more complicated, and parental alienation does exist. Both mothers and fathers do it. It's not gender specific. And that's the part that they will not go to, because they want to stick on this gender specific, when mothers are the victims.
So is it the case then, by implication, that those who suggest that parental alienation doesn't exist and is only a smokescreen for child abusers to use in court are themselves perhaps people who would support parental alienation and the weaponizing of children for the use in court, and they want to maintain its viability?
I don't know if I want to go that far, but they certainly are condoning it and encouraging it by their passivity and their refusal to see reality.
Okay. Nothing more real, of course, than money. And one of the questions that we got in is well, it's more of a suggestion with regards to the financial element of things. UK law does not recognize parental alienation. 2021 Domestic Abuse Act excluded parental alienation. We should report solicitors to the SRA for misconduct or sue them. This is something which Dr. Craig Childress has also advocated in terms of the people who do the assessments on parental alienation, and they simply get paid very well for doing these assessments, and they don't want them to end, so they never come up with any kind of conclusive recommendation or diagnosis. And he says that it's only going to change when people start suing the psychologists, which of course is almost impossible to do in court because it's such a subjective thing anyway. But I just wondered what your thoughts on that would be.
My thought, it's similar to what I said before. My principal goal is to get it right for the child's welfare and well-being. Yes, I want to get paid, but that's the end of it in my mind. I want to get it right. I am intellectually, professionally, ethically, morally determined to get it right. And I don't let any of I have never written an evaluation with the idea, I want to make this last for months and years so I can continue to get paid. I have never, ever, ever, ever thought that way or done that. I think that's outrageous.
In closing, because we're out of time, Dr. Blotcky, what would you suggest as the top points of action that we can take away from your wisdom today are? What do we need to do? What are the
top points? Here are the top points. Here are the top points. Be proactive, be assertive. Documentation is critical. Use of a timeline is critical. Have a good attorney, have a good mental health expert on your team.
Dr. Alan Blotcky, it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Special thanks to all at Alienated Children First. This conversation will, of course, continue online. Dr. Blotcky is going to remain available to respond to any pertinent questions. He's already told you that if he can be of professional assistance, you can contact him via alienated.ie. And we'll put you in touch there. But for the moment, from myself, Kenn Joyce, and all of us at Alienated Children First,